Dr. Wilson arrived early for work. He always did. It was hard to make it in this particular day because of the heavy snowfall all over the city. Still, he toughed it out and made it in. He always got to work because it was important to him. As he entered the office, he was hungry, and his little finger wouldn't stop twitching. It was 2 hours later he was talking to Abigail Slate through her session. This one had anxiety and depression, and she was presently telling him about how the anxieties were starting to get to her. "I mean, it's like," she said a bit too quickly, a bit too nervously. "Like I feel there's something going to get me, one way or the other." She looked up at him helplessly, despair in her face. "I don't know what to do." He nodded, trying to restrain himself from coming off as too eager. He spoke slowly, carefully. "I do think we should attempt an uptake in your medication." He paused, then went in for it. "I'm thinking, in particular, a new type of medication." She frowned and began rubbing her wrists, thinking it over. Finally, she again spoke. "I'm not sure. I don't know if I want more meds, you know?" He looked at her and felt so hungry, and he needed to feed. He needed it more than he'd ever needed anything in his life. Still, he stayed calm. "Well, look," he said casually, in a friendly manner even. "I know you well enough from how we've talked to know that you don't want to live your life constantly worried about every little thing. I know what it's like for people with anxiety, and it's a hell. Yes, I'm using that word, hell. Now to push it to the finish line. The medication I have in mind will tackle your anxiety head on. I've had nothing but good results from the folks that have signed on to it." She looked down at her feet and fidgeted, obviously in thought. As she did so, Dr. Wilson imagined himself racing through the forest, chasing down and then overtaking a deer before ripping it apart as he devoured it. Finally, after a few moments, she looked up, smiling hesitantly. Okay, I'll do it. What the hell, right?" Dr. Wilson smiled, working hard to restrain himself and to assure his hunger. She got onto the medication the next day. It immediately had an effect, and she even called Dr. Wilson's office 2 weeks later to say how the medication had been life-changing, how it had wiped out her anxiety practically overnight. Dr. Wilson didn't particularly care how it had helped her, but he did care that progress was being made. She was dead the next morning. Heart attack. Dr. Wilson knew, as he felt the life leave her body 20 miles away from his home, that the autopsy report would reveal nothing indicating foul play. Of course not. The spores were too good at what they did. A week after she died, he went to work, as always, and went through a number of sessions with a number of patients. He listened to their problems, which he didn't really give much of a shit about, and gave suggestions, many of which were meaningless and would do nothing to actually fix the stunning vapidity of their inane lives, and much else. He, of course, prescribed that special medication to the ones he chose, the ones who were full of life and health and vigor. That, and he fed. Oh, how he fed. He drove home quickly, eager to unwind. As he neared home, he fidgeted more and more as his discomfort grew. He had to get out of these clothes, out of this form. He finally pulled into the garage and raced into his house. He had barely finished closing the door to the garage behind him when he practically ripped his clothes off and let his body truly transform. He felt his bones crack and break, the pain so exquisite, and his bones radically changed shape and length, and his skin began to boil and drip as its character and substance changed at the molecular level. He screamed in joy as the shift continued. Then, just as sudden as it had started, it was complete. He peered at his living room with his multitude of minuscule eyes, skittering across the hardwood floor with his incredibly thin and bony multiple legs. He loved his legs. It was so hard getting used to a mere 2 of them to get around on in the outside world, even if he'd been using that form for his entire life in the human world. In his mind, he peered into the consciousness of the spores heavy at work in Abigail's corpse, now sealed in her casket, buried safely at the cemetery. They were at work. Oh yes. They ate, and they ate, and they ate, filling with sustenance. As they fed, so he was fed. He giggled, it coming out as a harsh, buzzing, scratching noise. Climbing into his nest in the attic, the space completely barren except for his vast web of the all-too-quickly hardening fluid he dispensed from his limbs in this form, he felt it. He felt the spores in his other patients at work, the ones who had taken the medication he prescribed to them. He felt joy rise within himself as he knew how it would all go. They would soon be dead, and he would be fed thereafter. Some days, he was hungry. Other days, he was quite full.